Hey guys, today we're talking about vitamin K2 and clotting. Uh, so I'm going to share my screen. And we're looking at this comment on the video that came out on YouTube today, vitamin K and clotting risk when not on anticoagulants. And Tired Looking for Name says, I thought that it is K1 that affects the blood clotting. And ivermectin says, correct. Sorry, but you guys are both wrong, and I'll show you why. So first, let's go to, well, let's start with a study that makes you guys look right. So we'll go to this study. Influence of vitamin K on anticoagulant therapy depends on vitamin K status and the source of chemical forms of vitamin K by Mary Ann Johnson from 2005 in Nutrition Reviews. And I'm not going to go deep into this because it's not super important, but we'll just look at the abstract. And is this the right paper? You know what? It looks like I pulled up the wrong paper. Okay, let me. No, not that one. Hold on one second, guys. Okay, here's the one I was looking for. If you don't know the shortcut for this, Command Shift T opens up your old tabs that you just closed. So I'm lucky that I didn't know. I went years without knowing that. But anyway, okay. This is the one that makes these guys look right. The relative effects of phylloquinone and menaquinone 4 on blood coagulation factor synthesis in vitamin K deficient rats. And you can see on here, Case Vermeer is on here, one of the major vitamin K2 researchers from the Netherlands. Thidson often works with him. And okay. So those are the major authors on here. Okay. So this is a study in rats, and they gave them a commercial vitamin K depleted diet and boiled white rice. After 1 week of treatment, the rats had developed severe vitamin K deficiency, resulting in a thrombotest values of 5 to 10% of the initial values. And so these are, roughly equivalent to doing a prothrombin time or an INR, international normalized ratio, which is used in humans who are on anticoagulant therapy. And so it's the numbers from what you do in the human test and the rat test aren't the same, but this just demonstrates the principle of whether either of these are having an effect on clotting and what the relative difference in that effect is. So they go on to say, in this experimental system, the efficacy of phylloquinone or vitamin K1 was compared to that of menaquinone 4, MK4, by measuring the extent to which the thrombotest was normalized after the administration of varying doses of the respective vitamins. Oral administration of the vitamins showed that the efficacy of K1 was at least 2-fold higher than that of MK4. Okay, so let's pause for a moment and think about what that means. So on the one hand, yes, K1 is at least twice as effective as MK4 at promoting clotting, but that doesn't mean that it's, let's go back to what they had said. I'm not sharing my screen, but Tired Looking for Name says, I thought that it is K1 that affects the blood clotting, and ivermectin says correct. So they're saying, I thought K1 affects the clotting and K2 doesn't. Even with this study, that's false. It's just that K1 is more effective at promoting the clotting than MK4. Now, if you look for studies in humans, I believe you will find that there aren't any that sort of head-to-head compare K1 and MK4 for in humans on anticoagulants to see how they each impact the INR. But we do have those studies for K1 versus MK7. So let's take a look at those. And there's 2 that we're going to look at. All right, we'll do that one second. So the first one we're going to look at is a paper from Nutrition and so this is the abstract that I was looking at before. a couple minutes ago. Let's see, hide thumbnails. Where's hide thumbnails? Hide sidebar. Where'd it go? Okay. So this is influence of vitamin K on anticoagulant therapy depends on vitamin K status and the source of and chemical forms of vitamin K by Mary Ann Johnson. And this is a review, but it's got a lot of data in it. So we're just going to scoot down to here. And here what we're looking at is different doses of vitamin K1 or K2, but the K2 forms are MK9 from curd cheese or MK7 from natto. Some of these are supplements and some of these are from food. And what you're seeing graphed is the INR, or international normalized ratio. And these are people who are on anacumarol, which is a vitamin K antagonist anticoagulant. So any anticoagulant that is a class as a 4-hydroxycoumarin is chemically related to warfarin or Coumadin, and may have various names. In this case, anacumarol is the one they were using. But all of these 4-hydroxycoumarins, which were first patented as rat poisons, but are used medically in humans to control blood clotting, and so in the rats, you use a very high dose, which leads to blood thinning and leads to calcification of the arteries. And so you get very thin blood with very brittle blood vessels, and all the blood vessels burst and the animal bleeds to death. And if the animal didn't bleed to death, they would, probably die from just massive cardiovascular calcification eventually anyway. But because it also thins the blood, they bleed to death. So we use a much lower dose of that rat poison in humans to prevent excessive clotting. And that, you might be preventing excessive clotting, or you might just be preventing normal clotting because you're trying to compensate for something that is where clotting would be particularly dangerous. And the INR is basically it's derived from prothrombin time. So prothrombin time is basically looking at, if you clot the blood, how long does it take to clot? And then that number can be converted into the INR, which is a metric of the efficacy of the dose of the anticoagulant that they're on at this time. And so if you're on an oral vitamin K antagonist anticoagulant, you generally want the INR to be somewhere between 2 and 3. That's the therapeutic window. If you get up to 4 or 5, you're going to have a significant risk of a bleeding disorder. And if you're below 2, you're below the therapeutic window, meaning the blood is has a greater propensity to clot than what you're trying to achieve in that patient. And so you can see baseline, it's just at 2, and there's some variation here, but generally the mean or median or whatever this is, I think it's mean plus standard deviation. So mean is a little over 2. 2 standard deviations would be somewhere up around 2.6 to 2.8. So these people are generally in the range of, well, actually, I guess you could go up and down 2 standard deviations. If it's normally distributed, these people are probably going to be generally in the range of 1.4 or 6 to 2.6 or 8. But let's just look at the means because it's easier. So we start at a mean of 2, and then you can see supplements of 50 micrograms K1, 100 micrograms K1, 150, 200, 250, 300, 500. And you go down in the INR from 2 down to looks like 1.3 or 1.4. So you're starting to get a statistically significant effect at 150 micrograms of K1. Although you can kind of see that, just look at the means declining. Looks like the effect actually starts at 50 micrograms, and the study's underpowered to actually see the effect there. And it just looks like you have this sort of linear drift off or drift down of the INR, where it reaches its lowest point with 500 micrograms. It also sort of looks like if this study was larger and you could achieve statistical significance with everything, you're probably getting the bulk of the effect in the sort of going to 0 to 50 micrograms, really. And then you get a much smaller incremental increase with each dose as you go down this way. Now, if we look over here, they have 1,500 micrograms of K1 from spinach, which was less effective than 1/3 the amount of supplement. And so that's reflecting poor absorption from spinach. Spinach seems to have poor absorption of many, many things, especially calcium. 700 micrograms of broccoli with 700 micrograms K1 from broccoli. Basically the same thing. INR is a little bit lower than spinach, although not statistically different from spinach. Well, actually, I should make the point that all these asterisks are basically, these are all statistically indistinguishable from each other, but they are distinguishable from this one that's marked with the plus sign. But, you know, because this is not very statistically powerful, I do think it makes sense to visually compare this graph just to get a sense of what these are doing. And if you look at 1,000 micrograms from natto, then 1,000 micrograms from natto is basically giving you the equivalent of 500 micrograms of K1 from a supplement. But you got to kind of compare the foods to each other because the foods don't seem as effective as the supplement do if we compare the K1 from spinach or broccoli to the K1 from the supplement. So I think the fair comparison would be 1,000 micrograms of MK7 from natto is actually considerably more, it's not statistically different, but it looks considerably more effective than 1,500 micrograms from K1, even though it's 2/3 the dose. So MK7 in food seems to be, you know, no statistical significance, but it seems to be considerably more effective than K1 from food does. And MK9 from the curd cheese does not seem to be that effective. It's not statistically significantly different. Of course, you know, comparing the foods, at 103 micrograms of MK9 from the curd cheese is way less than any of the doses of any of these other foods. But if we compare it to 50 or 100 micrograms, well, they also weren't statistically different, but it's still sort of, you know, if you just visually trace this over, the MK9 seems to be less effective than the K1. We'd need a better study to actually conclude that. So at a minimum, what we can say from this study is that, number one, K1 from foods is less effective than K1 from supplements due to poor absorption. And number two, MK7 seems to be, when you visually inspect the graph, more effective, considerably more effective than K1 from food, but the study's statistically underpowered to actually show that. But again, this study sort of when we looked at the rat study and saw that K1 was 2 to 3 times more effective than MK4, that's obviously not the case here. That's obviously not the case in humans when comparing K1 and MK7. The best argument you could make against what I'm saying is that the MK7 is not statistically distinguishable from the K1, in which case you'd argue that they're the same effectiveness. But if anything, if there is a difference, MK7 is stronger than K1. So now let's go to this other study. And by the way, feel free to ask a question about I'll take any question about vitamin K in the chat. And as soon as I review this paper, I'll go look at the chat for questions. So this paper is low dose. Actually, this isn't the paper I thought it was, but let me just show this. So this paper isn't that useful because it's the best I could find for the effect of MK4 on clotting in humans. So the reason this isn't useful is because these young males are not on vitamin K antagonist anticoagulants. Therefore, we don't care what their INR is. It's just their INR is irrelevant. But we can use it to just see if there's an effect. And so first thing you can notice is the median INR is around 1. And so that just goes to show you that people on vitamin K anticoagulants they're not on the anticoagulant to create a normal amount of blood clotting. They're on the anticoagulant to create defective vitamin K metabolism to create an INR that's double the normal value in young healthy males. Double to triple, right? Because the therapeutic window is 2 to 3. So the normal INR is 1. And this is very small, because which makes sense because it's tightly controlled, right? This is normal metabolism controlling a normal INR, so it's controlling it very tightly. Whereas when you're a physician administering a drug, you're trying to be very precise, but you're nowhere. The physician prescribing the dose is not going to be anywhere near precise as your body's own homeostasis, and so you get a lot more variation. It's harder to show the statistical significant effect. But here, the INR goes from a median of 1.05 to 1.08, and it's statistically significant. So this is like a infinitesimal difference, and yet it's statistically significant. But this effect, so that's proof of principle that MK4 affects clotting in humans, period, end of story. And that's all we need to show. But because their INR is not being pharmacologically modulated, then vitamin K's, you wouldn't even expect it actually to have much of an effect, and it doesn't have much of an effect. So the fact that you can statistically significantly distinguish that effect is sort of in itself, that in itself is quite interesting. So anyway, but this study's not that valuable. What we would want to see is a paper on the INR in someone actually on a 4-hydroxycoumarin to see if MK4 affects it, and we don't have that. Okay, so this paper is, This paper is effective low-dose supplements of metaquinone 7, vitamin K2, and the stability of oral anticoagulant treatment, dose-response relationship in healthy volunteers. Unfortunately, they put all this stuff in tables instead of graphs, and so we don't have a nice way of visually demonstrating it. So I'm just going to skip to their discussion. But anyway, they say here, group analysis of the INR changes showed that there was a gradual fall in mean INR with increasing doses of MK7. The mean decrease did not attain statistical significance until the daily dose had increased to 45 micrograms. However, at the individual level, the 10 microgram and 20 microgram MK7 doses were associated with a clinically relevant lowering of INR in at least 40 and 60% of subjects, respectively. So 10 micrograms MK7 had a clinically relevant lowering of INR in 40% of the people, and 20 micrograms of MK7 had a clinically relevant lowering of the INR in 60% of the people. I hate this, respectively. Like, it makes you seem smart to use this and this and this and this respectively, but it's just so much easier to read if you just said 10 micrograms did it in 40% of people and 20 micrograms did it in 60% of people. Anyway, grammar rant, style rant, and ended. This sensitivity to MK7 is much greater than that for vitamin K1. Okay, this is a real important part, right? This sensitivity to MK7 is much greater than that for vitamin K1. Here we're actually, remember before, it looked like that was probable when we were seeing the effects of different foods, but we didn't have the statistics for it. This, unfortunately, isn't a head-to-head comparison of MK7. It's a comparison of just looking at the effect of MK7. But when you compare it to the studies on K1, and we have supplemental forms of each now, this sensitivity to MK7 is much greater than that for vitamin K1. Daily supplementation with 50 and 100 micrograms over consecutive weeks produced no clinically relevant decrease in INR, and supplementation with 150 micrograms per day in the following week was considered to be clinically relevant in only 25% of subjects. In a preliminary direct comparative study, we showed that a dose of 100 micrograms of MK7 had a marked effect on INR as compared with vitamin K1 in the same subjects. Maybe I should bring up that paper. With the daily intakes required to lower the INR from 2.0 to 1.5 as an endpoint, it was calculated that MK7 was 2.4-fold more potent than vitamin K1 on a weight basis. 100 130 micrograms of MK7 versus 316 micrograms of vitamin K1, and 3.5-fold more potent on a molar basis, 200 nanomoles of MK7 versus 700 nanomoles of vitamin K1. So I think a molar basis is better for describing the biology, and a weight basis is better for describing like a practical, the practical effect. Because when you buy a supplement, you're not going to look at nanomoles, you're going to look at micrograms. But if you're just, molar basis reflects the number of molecules. So molecule per molecule, MK7 is 3.5 times more effective than K1. But on a practical level, you're going to look at micrograms, and microgram for microgram, 130 micrograms of MK7 gives you the same effect as 316 micrograms of K1, which is 2.5 times more potent. MK7 is 2.5 times more potent. So this is derived from reference 5. Since they just summarized it, I don't see the point of bringing it up, but let's just look at that paper. So that's from the paper Sugars et al. Vitamin K containing dietary supplements, comparison of synthetic K1 and natto-derived MK7, Blood 2007, etc. You see it on the screen there. So why is that? Well, first of all, let's summarize that. So if we take the rat study as roughly predictive of humans, because we don't have a human comparison for MK4, then it looks like K1 is 2 to 3 times more effective than MK4. But if we look at that reference 5 from that last paper, then MK7 is exactly the same, more effective than K1, 2.5 times more effective than K1. So, the real way to describe this is all vitamin K participates in clotting, but when you compare them, based on animal data, K1 is 2.5 times more effective than MK4. Based on human data, MK7 is 2.5 times more effective than K1. And this is probably a result partly of their tissue distribution. So it might just be that MK7 is reaching the liver more effectively than K1, and K1 is reaching the liver more effectively than MK4. But it may also be related to their rate of metabolism. So MK4 has been shown to have a higher rate of metabolic breakdown, and that is because it is less soluble in the cell membrane, and so it's more available to the enzymes that break it down, and it's also more available to participate in nuclear signaling that will increase the production of the enzymes that break it down. So MK4 the liver is where most of that breakdown takes place. So the MK4 that does reach the liver is going to be broken down at a greater rate, and will probably stimulate the breakdown of other forms of vitamin K, of vitamin E, and other fat-soluble vitamins at a greater rate. And so it's just totally false that K1 participates in clotting and K2 doesn't. But if you're going to get into the specific forms, MK7 is better than K1 is better than MK4. On that basis, first of all, none of this matters to someone who is not on vitamin K antagonist anticoagulants. And that was the point of the video that came out this morning that those people were commenting on. But if you are on vitamin K anticoagulant, on vitamin K antagonist anticoagulants, you'll probably probably be able to tolerate more MK4 with a lower effect on your INR than you would any other form of vitamin K. But I would not go on any form of vitamin K. I wouldn't even go on a vitamin K rich food without telling the prescribing physician, so that they can be aware of the fact that they might have to change the dose of that drug to get you back into an INR in the therapeutic window. So to summarize, if you're not on vitamin K anticoagulants, doesn't matter. If you're on vitamin K anticoagulants, MK7 will have the biggest effect, MK4 presumably the lowest, K1 intermediate. But talk to the physician about it, because any of them might impact the dose of the medication that you have to be on. All right, I'm going to go to the live chat now. So Whitney, Darius Carter says, "What is this? I randomly found, but I like vitamins, so want to know." Darius, if you want the original video that they're looking on, go to my channel and look at the most recent video from this morning. But if you want to know all about vitamin K2, go to chrismasterjohnphd.com/K2, the ultimate vitamin K2 resource. Whitney Occoin says, "Love your lives. That's all I can say." Thank you. Thank you, Whitney. Mike says, "Hi, Chris. Sup, chat." Hi, Mike. Sup. Protein says, "Is there any potential issue with daily K2 MK4 supplementation in the 500 to 1,000 microgram range?" I don't know what you mean by potential issue. So if you're talking about clotting and you're on a vitamin K anticoagulant, then there's a potential issue and you need to talk to the prescribing physician about it. But if you're not on a vitamin K anticoagulant, I wouldn't worry about a clotting issue, if that's what you mean. Mike says, "I always found it strange that Japanese studies used MK4, not MK7, with natto being native." Yeah, that is interesting, but I think that's largely historical accident. And so, and I also think the Japanese have viewed it more as a drug than anything else. So I think they just had a much more pharmacological perspective in the first place. Oh shoot, the title says ivermectin. Ah, damn it. I don't know how that happened. I thought I updated it correctly, but apparently not. Okay, now it says K2 and clotting. Thank you. Ivermectin was the one I did yesterday. I don't know how it didn't accept my change to the title. Okay, so Mike was saying, strange that Japanese had natto native and MK4 is the form they've studied. It is interesting because all the natto research is basically from the Netherlands, and all the K1 research is basically from the United States. I honestly think that has more to do with, largely is driven by the fact that all this research has been done by like one or two groups in each country. It's not like vitamin K is a popular research topic. And so, the Japanese just, maybe that's where MK4 was first synthesized. I'm not 100% sure about that, but they very early on, many decades ago, they developed MK4, and they're the ones that have been studying high dose MK4 for osteoporosis, but they haven't been viewing it as a nutrient at all. They've been viewing it as a pharmacological osteoporosis drug. And so I think that's why that discrepancy exists. It is interesting that the Netherlands have done all the MK7 research. But I think that's because I don't know. I don't know the exact origin of it, but most of that research has all been a huge bulk of it has been funded by like one natto-based supplement company. So I think it's sort of like, they were interested in it, and that company said, "Hey, study our thing," and then that kind of blossomed. And then in the United States, I don't know, not sure why it's all been K1 in the United States, but I think United States has kind of had a vegetarian-ish, plant-based bias going on in public health circles for the last half century. And so I think that's been part of that. Nikki McMillan says, "What if you're not on a vitamin K antagonist, but you take several blood thinning supplements, high E, nattokinase, omegas, ubiquinol?" Well, I don't think any of those. Yeah, I mean, if you're taking high dose vitamin E to achieve an anti-clotting effect, then you effectively are doing the same thing as a vitamin K antagonist. And because the vitamin E, if the vitamin E thins your blood, it's because it's breaking down vitamin K and creating a vitamin K deficiency. I wouldn't do that. If you look at the evidence for high dose vitamin E is exclusively in around 145 milligrams being helpful for age-related immunity in people over 65. And getting into higher doses is very unclear whether it is helpful versus harmful. And so there's just clinical studies don't support high dose vitamin E outside a dose under 150 milligrams, around 145 milligrams for people over 65 for immunity. And higher doses look like they could be associated with harm in other contexts. So I just don't think that's a good idea. But you would be vulnerable to, if vitamin E is causing vitamin K to break down, and that's what's causing your blood to thin, then yeah, your blood vitamin K is going to increase your blood clotting because you're fixing a vitamin K deficiency. Nattokinase, no, because that doesn't operate by degrading MK4, by degrading vitamin K. Omegas and ubiquinol, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they cause the breakdown of fat-soluble things. That seems possible. But the main way that omega-3s are going to do that is by interfering with arachidonic acid metabolism. And so I would be aware that you're basically using an NSAID. If you're using high-dose fish oil to cause blood thinning, you're basically taking an NSAID. So think of it that way. Don't think of it like a nutrient. Think of it like an NSAID. But NSAIDs don't interfere with vitamin K metabolism. They interfere with arachidonic acid metabolism. Ubiquinol, I'm not sure. Wouldn't be surprised if ubiquinol increased the breakdown of vitamin K, since they're both highly structurally related quinones. But off the top of my head, I don't know. So, but definitely yes for the vitamin E. Definitely not for the nattokinase. Probably not for the omega-3, and maybe for the ubiquinol. ProTool44 says, so I'm just taking questions on vitamin K. Sorry for the title saying ivermectin. I'm not taking ivermectin questions right now. Sandra Nira says, also love your lives. Thank you. Tiago Silva says, can K vitamin be bad for SARS-CoV-2 since COVID is a coagulant disease? No. In fact, there's some evidence to the contrary. Well, I mean, yes, if you're on warfarin in the specific way, or any 4-hydroxycurcumin, only limited to the specific case that it will impact the INR. You will need a higher dose of that nutrient to impact the INR. But so I'm just searching my site for K2 COVID, and I'll share my screen now. So if you search, this is what I did. K2 COVID at chrismasterjohnphd.com, and you have vitamin K and COVID-19. And this is a paper, and this was from April last year. I'm not sure if they've done any follow-up, but this is a paper where 134 subjects hospitalized for COVID-19 between March 12th and 11th. They categorized their outcome as good or poor, depending on whether they received ventilation and or died. The lung damage was quantified on a 25-point scale, depending on the percentage of the lungs affected. And they quarantining prevented them from getting non-infected patients as healthy controls. So they compared COVID-19 patients to 140 healthy age-matched controls from a previous study. And what they did was they quantified vitamin K status by measuring DP-UCMGP, and this is des-phospho uncarboxylated matrix GLA protein, which is a vitamin K activated protein produced by the blood vessels and cartilage that protects soft tissues from calcification. And they, at the time that I wrote this, they had updated the paper to also include they included the paper to also include PIVKA2, which is protein induced by vitamin K absence or antagonist 2, which rises when the liver does not have enough vitamin K to activate all the factors in the clotting cascade. PIVKA2 is high. It means that there's not enough vitamin K to support clotting. Okay, so what they found was in the healthy controls, DPUCMGP was 471 In COVID patients, it was 1482. So that suggests that COVID-19 patients had 3 times higher of this marker of blood vessels not having enough vitamin K to protect themselves from calcification. If the COVID-19 patients with a good outcome were compared to those with a bad outcome, then the DPUC-MGP was 72% greater. So basically, blood vessels are deficient in vitamin K in COVID patients, and worse patients, that is, patients that are more likely to need mechanical ventilation and or die, have an even worse degree of blood vessel vitamin K deficiency than COVID-19 patients with better outcomes. So in the patients who were not using vitamin K antagonists, the PIVKA2 levels were normal in 82%, mildly elevated in 14%, and elevated in 4%. And COVID-19, if you compare those to healthy controls, wait a second. In patients who are not using vitamin K. Oh, so they compared the distribution of PIVKA2 in good versus poor outcomes, and the mean was lower in those with the poor outcomes, suggesting that, if anything, their livers had better access to vitamin K. However, the overall interpretation of the PIVKA2 data is that COVID-19 patients in general had adequate vitamin K for clotting. Okay, I see. So the PIVKA2 is reflecting the need of vitamin K for clotting, whereas the DPUC MGP is reflecting the need of the blood vessels for vitamin K to protect against calcification. And the COVID-19 patients have more vitamin K deficiency in their blood vessels, but overall are vitamin K adequate in their livers. So they do not have enough vitamin K to protect against calcification of blood vessels, but they do have enough to activate clotting factors. So they also had breakdown products of desmosine and isodesmosine are formed when an elastic fibers of the blood vessels, namely the protein elastin, are degraded. And so those are generally elevated with things like smoking and other ways of inducing oxidative stress. And so these values were higher in COVID-19 patients than in age-matched never smokers, or age-matched former or current smokers. And it was even higher in those with a poor outcome. So that indicates that the blood vessel elastic fibers are being broken down. And I guess the reason that that's somewhat relevant here is that calcification of the blood vessels is really bad for blood vessel elasticity and can be a factor in the breakdown of elastin. And they correlated that with DPUC-MGP. So DPUC-MGP, the marker of the blood vessels having deficient vitamin K, explained 26% of the variation in the breakdown of elastic fibers, which was greater in COVID-19 patients. And so, end result is, if you are taking, and if you're maybe in COVID your D dimers found elevated, and so they put you on 4-hydroxycoumarin in order to counteract that and to counteract the clotting issues. In that specific case, then if you go on a vitamin K supplement, then you will impact the effectiveness of that drug, and you will change whether a given dose puts you in the therapeutic window of the INR. And so you would have to work that out with the prescribing physician. But if you're not put on vitamin K antagonist for that specific reason, then the overall perspective vis-a-vis COVID is that blood vessels are deficient in COVID patients in vitamin K. They can't protect themselves from calcification. that's correlated with bad COVID outcomes and with the breakdown of elastic fibers in the blood vessels. And so outside of the specific case of being put on vitamin K antagonist anticoagulants, you want more vitamin K to protect the blood vessels in COVID. Okay, sorry if the title says ivermectin. I did change it to K2 and clotting, and hopefully it says that now. Protein says, I actually enjoy natto when I can find it. It should cover vitamin K needs, right? Or do we need to take balanced K1, K2 intake? My perspective is that, it's there's a lot of gray area and uncertainty, but I think given the uncertainty, it's better to try to get a well-rounded vitamin K intake. So get K1 from green vegetables, get MK7 from natto, also eat foods that have MK4 in them. Tiago Silva says, can vitamin K2 or K1 be unappropriated? I assume you mean inappropriate for SARS-CoV-2 or taking the vaccine due to a more risk of clot. Okay, I guess you asked that twice. I just answered that. Mazen Ali says, natto is so cheap and widely available in Japan, so the industry gravitated to a more marketable MK4 to justify pharmaceuticals. That makes total sense. Protein says, how much vitamin K should someone take if they take a daily baby aspirin? I don't see any reason why a daily baby aspirin would change that. And I think general maintenance dose of K2 would be 100 to 200 micrograms total K2 plus K1 from the green vegetables in your diet. Darius Carter says, I've been taking vitamin E, but it DRV very high. I don't know what that means. Now I need to balance it out, and I have everything else mentioned except K. Okay. I guess that's not a question. Nick Blackburn says 400 IU per day of vitamin E mixed tocopherol is okay if taken a different time of day from K. No, I wouldn't take 400 milligrams or IU. IU and milligrams are a little bit different, but they're not so different that they're a little bit different, but it's not like an order of magnitude or anything. It's actually less than double. I forget the conversion factor, but anyway, 400 IU of well, actually, let me just look it up. So vitamin E IU to milligram conversion. So 1 IU of vitamin E is 0.67 milligrams. So 400 IU is 268 milligrams. Anyway, I wouldn't take 400 IU. Like I just said before in an answer to a different question, the only clinical research that provides sort of clear benefit of high dose vitamin E is preventing the age-related decline in immunity that otherwise occurs in people over 65, where 145 milligrams of vitamin E, which is 216 IU, has been shown to be effective with no safety concerns. But higher doses of vitamin E have raised safety concerns in clinical trials. Let me see if I can pull up. Probably can pull up a summary pretty fast. So I did take notes and kept some references on this. Okay, let's do it like this. Okay, so the Women's Health Study found that 300 IU per day over 10 years reduced the risk of a heart attack, but only in women over 65 at baseline. It reduced venous thromboembolism 12% in those younger than 55, but 26% in those older than 65. However, in the Physicians' Health Study, 200 IU did not impact CVD in middle-aged men and raised a possible concern of increasing hemorrhagic stroke. And so probably you could obviate that risk by taking enough vitamin K. And maybe the way that you would do that is measure prothrombin time, or INR, and try to keep it to 1, which is sort of normal INR outside the context of therapeutic warfarin use. In patients with existing heart disease, 400 or 800 IU reduced non-fatal MI, but heart disease mortality was slightly higher with vitamin E, and all-cause mortality was 33% higher, suggesting against the net benefit for healthy aging at those doses in those populations studied. So the apparent benefits of high-dose vitamin E are in those trials are concentrated in women over 65 and are not much stronger than the 35% lower CVD risk that you see in observational studies, where they're looking at people with different dietary doses of vitamin E, where they're saying basically that more than 7 milligrams or 10 IU is lowering CVD risk by 3 to 5 milligrams or 4 to 7.5 IU from food. So without head-to-head dose comparisons, it's difficult to say that the 200 to 300 IU has a specific from the women's health study has a specific CVD benefit when the dietary vitamin E at much lower doses seems to have the same degree of protectiveness. So, what I'm seeing from that is that basically like, at 400 800 IU, you sort of have this clear, and granted, it's limited to patients with existing heart disease, but that's where you're seeing a 33% higher risk of death. And 200 IU increasing the risk of hemorrhagic stroke in the physician's health studies, probably indicating that dose can interfere with vitamin K metabolism, and you could probably get around it with vitamin K. But with the women's health study showing 300 IU over 10 years reduced the risk of a heart attack in women over 65, but not younger women, and some lesser benefit on venous thromboembolism, which again is probably reflecting the interference with vitamin K intake, and so probably is just reflecting the drug-like effect of it. I mean, basically, it's hard to conclude anything about the dose when just going up to 7 IU in the diet has the same effect. Whereas when you get to 200 or 300 IU, you're seeing a clear interference with vitamin K metabolism that seems to benefit venous thromboembolism, but increase the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. And then when you're getting into people with existing heart disease and you go up to 400 or 800 IU, you're increasing the all-cause mortality by a third. So I think you're kind of getting to the point where you're playing with fire. When you're getting into 200 IU, you're getting a vitamin K antagonism that is a drug-like effect. And, you could balance it with vitamin K, but why would you balance it with vitamin K when the benefit is coming from a drug-like effect that decreases your risk of venous thromboembolism and increases your risk of hemorrhagic stroke? So yeah, you could probably protect yourself from the increase in hemorrhagic stroke with vitamin K, and then obliterate the benefit to venous thromboembolism. But then why are you doing it? What's the point? If you're not a pre-existing heart disease patient, then it's probably not going to increase your all-cause mortality 33%. But why are you doing it? I just don't see the point of high-dose vitamin E like that. Okay, I'm just taking K2 questions, or vitamin K questions in general. Carol Seaver says, what form is best for keeping calcium out of arteries? My personal belief is that MK4 is likely to be best. But due to lack of studies, I think that you want to focus on K2 with a mix of MK7 and MK4, plus preferentially the other K forms that are found in foods by including K2 rich foods. All right, just scanning for vitamin K questions. Kaniji Kalesi says, dude, I'm having blood thickening after COVID-19 several times. Not surprising. That's one of the main ways that it causes harm. I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope you get better. $1100 says K2 deficiency is more profound as you get older, I think. I don't remember the exact studies on that, but nutrient deficiencies in general get worse as you get older. 1100 says, have read bone spurs are as common as gray hair. If you want to address bone spurs, K2 and vitamin E are helpful. Wouldn't be surprise me. I know there's anecdotal evidence favoring that, but it makes sense that K2 would, because it's anti-calcification. Mazin Ali says, obscure question, is there a relationship between alkaline phosphatase activity and vitamin K metabolism? Not that I'm aware of, but I might be blanking on it, but I don't know what it would be. Maple Guitar says, for several years, I've been using Innovix Labs Full Spectrum K2 you recommended. Over that time, my CIMT scans keep improving. I attribute this to the supplement. Do you think that's plausible? Totally plausible. Through protecting against vascular calcification. Granted, carotid IMT is looking at thickness. It's not really looking at specifically at calcification, but calcification will be a factor in driving thickness in some cases, just by making the plaque more complicated. Okay, last question. Johnny Valamir says, do you have a resource on vitamin K and tips for supplementation? Just joined. Yeah, go to the Ultimate Vitamin K2 resource at chrismasterjohnphd.com/K2. All right, thanks, guys. Hope to see you tomorrow. Take care.